Okay. All right. Great evening, everybody. My goodness. I hope you're having an amazing day. I hope you feel as amazing as I believe you are. And so I just want to say welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you for coming into the Zoom room and the social media room and all that jazz. So my name is Robinette Cross, and I think this is like we have a good group inside of the Zoom platform room. I'm really excited to have you all here, and I'm grateful that you chose to spend a portion of your time today with me. So I'm really thankful. And I am excited to interact with you. And what that looks like is completely up to you. This is a space where you can say something or not. You can kick back, relax, whatever works. I'm doing the work. You're doing the listening and learning and offering your feedback and opinions. So today's work, this is the third. This is the third week, yeah, because it's the third week of Black History Month, right? And so this is the third week of our discussion on the work of remembering. And I'm specifically talking about using Virginia as a classroom, using Virginia as an opportunity for us to take a glimpse at the work of this week, Black women, institutions, and how they frame thoughts, how they frame classes, how they frame education, how the work that Black women have been doing. And I'm focusing on Black women, institutions, and power. And I'm going to be using Virginia as a prime example. Why? Because as I mentioned last week, if you can understand Virginia, its historical patterns, and a lot of its institutionalization, it can help you understand the rest of, or a lot of the rest of the patterns of the nation. So we will get started. And also, I live in Virginia, right? And I'm a social studies teacher here in Virginia. Now, by training, I am not an Americanist by training. As some of you may know, I am an Africanist by training. That means that my formal education, when I went to university, I went to an HBCU. I went to Spelman College, and my education is in history with a concentration in Africa. And then when I went on to graduate school at NYU, I my work was in African history. So how did I end up talking about the United States? Because it's easy to do so because the African diaspora spans multiple continents, right? And so excuse me, part of what I do at the school where I teach, and I teach at a gifted high school, one of the top high schools in the nation, is one of the things that I teach is about Africa, of course, in the Middle East. And then I also teach US history. And I teach civil rights. I teach all kinds of different historical concepts, which is great. So, talking about power is important because power is one of those things that's like energy. It's neither created nor destroyed, but it does change based on time, location, and situation. So it's one of those things where you are relinquishing some or you have to reclaim some. And so power is what you build, but it is something that is internal and is external, but it does not have to be recreated over and over and over again. So when we talk about Black women in power, we can't treat politics like it's only national and celebrity shaped. In real life, actually, institutions are shaped locally by just your normal everyday people, by people who decide budgets, schools, land use, housing, and who gets protected when the city grows. That's why I want to anchor us in Central Virginia. So I'm not exactly inside of the city of Richmond. I'm in one of the suburbs, but the work that I do, my school is in the city of Richmond, even though the school where I work actually we have 14 different districts represented at that school. It is housed in the city of Richmond. And so Richmond and the surrounding area, uh, I focus on that because you can literally watch Black women shaping institutions in real time. So let's start with Richmond City Council because City Council is not symbolic power. City Council is structural power. City Council votes touch the budget, neighborhood development, contracts, public services, and just the everyday governance that determines whether a city is livable for everybody, not just profitable for somebody. So on Richmond City Council, you can name Black women who are in the work. Kenya Gibson, Ellen Robertson, Cynthia Newbell, and among many others. So I want you to notice that their power isn't just in a speech, it's a repeated civic labor, which means that they are showing up when community is tired, voting on what gets funded, shaping what counts as public good, and advocating when policy turns people into numbers. So in Richmond, you can actually see women gaining structural leadership roles. Hey, Pammy, my best friend is on Facebook. For example, Michelle Mosby, if you all know her, she's actually a really wonderful woman. She made history as the first African American woman to serve as Richmond City Council president. And this was only a few years ago. That matters because leadership positions don't just come with the title, they shape agendas, priorities, and what gets attention. Now, let's widen the lens beyond city council because institutional power isn't only government, it's also the governance of education. In Henrico County, so if you all know anything about the kind of the counties that surround the city of Richmond, then you will know that we have some of the suburbs that are really big. And Richmond City is home to millions of people, right? And as I mentioned last week, it is actually Richmond has the largest number of um, public housing projects across 3 states. It's bigger than, they have more than Maryland, more than North Carolina. It is across 3 states. We have the most. We have 6 public housing complexes just in Richmond City alone. And we also know that funding in Richmond City for education is now being threatened significantly to the tune of a $20 million cut that's up on the docket for this coming academic year. And it is something that is taking a lot of trials and tribulations and it's causing not just women, but you have a woman who is the head of the teacher representatives. You have, a Black woman who's at the head of that teacher representative. So you see them showing up as advocates, as educators, and as power generators. So when you think about Henrico County, that's one of the large counties that's actually to both the east and the west of Richmond. It's split. It's a county that's split. So Weston Henrico always has more financial opportunities, educational opportunities than Easton Henrico, which is something that is a vast inequity. And unfortunately, it's something that the East and Henrico representatives are constantly battling, in order to have representation. I'm just gonna let somebody else in. So in Henrico County, for example, we have Miss Alicia Atkins. She is amazing. She also sits on the board, the regional board of directors for our school, because we have to have a representative from each region that our school makes up. I told you the school where I work, we have 14 different districts represented. She is the Henrico County representative who sits on our regional board. And she also is the first woman and first African American school board representative from a specific district called the Varina district. She's not the first African American, but she is the first woman to be the African American woman to be directed to that district. Later, she was elected as the first Black woman chair of the Henrico School Board, and this is how she ends up on our regional board as well. That's not just representation, and I can tell you from personal experience when we have to go in that room to that regional board, and I look around at those representatives, and they come from Richmond, Henrico, Hanover. They come from King and Queen. They come from New Kent. They come from all different districts. There are Petersburg. There are about 2 of the 14 who are African American, and there is one woman, I believe, who's on that board, and that is her name is Alicia Atkins. Okay. And it feels really good going into a place where, as one of the only African American educators, African American educators and African American female educators at my school where I teach, it feels really good to go in there to have that representation, to have her looking back at me in a leadership position, knowing that I also hold a level of leadership at my school. It feels reassuring. So representation matters a great deal on all levels. And so she's not just she's representing, but it's shaping an institution that decides what children have access to what. Things like programming, priorities, discipline policy, and what excellence looks like. Statistics show that in communities, in schools, on jobs, people need to have the big word, which is the B word, belonging. They have to have representation. They feel more comfortable knowing that other people who look like them, who are from a similar location, are invested in them. They get enthusiasm, knowing and understanding that people who look like them are also rooting for them. They feel a deeper drive in understanding that they are carrying parts of their communities, at the forefront, and it just gives you a new energy. If you've ever looked around a room before, so there's a book by she was my president when I was at Spelman. We started our first years at Spelman together, but her name is Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. She's a PhD psychologist. She's an amazing woman, and she served at Spelman for a while, and she's a brilliant woman, and she wrote a book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race. One of the reasons for that is because she was one of only two African American women to ever be the president of Spelman College. Spelman College, a school founded for African American women. Only at that time, she was the second African American female president, second only to Dr. Janetta B. Cole, who went on to Bennett College. Could you imagine what that felt like before, to not have to be a premier institution and not have the person who's in the top level of that institution look like you, be able to relate to you in a diasporic or cultural way? It can be isolating. So this representation is absolutely important. And the hands that are in leadership positions all need to look like people they represent, their constituents, right? So here's the point I want to press in. Black women in local positions, like political positions, education, governance, have often been asked to do two jobs at once. One job is to govern or to lead, right? The other job is to prove they belong in the room while they're governing, while they're leading, while they're teaching, and still they do the work, because the stakes are not theoretical. They really are high. The stakes are children, the stakes are housing, representation, community health, safety, and opportunity. This is why I say Black women have been integral at every level of African American survival, every single level. And also because I'm a Black woman. So, there's that credential. Because survival isn't only emotional, survival is institutional. Things like who can learn, who can own, who can protect, who can build wealth, who gets to stay when a neighborhood changes, who gets to stay when taxes get too high, who has to go, right? All of this stuff matters. So when we honor Black women, we cannot honor only the moments when they are first. We need to honor the repeated labor of holding the line, widening the door, and building structures. So all I'll say in terms of stating it plainly is a lot of what we call community has been held together by Black women doing work that was never properly funded, properly protected, or properly credited. That is local power. That is Central Virginia power, and that is institutional power. So let's talk about the ways in which you see African American women showing up. One is you see them. Virginia is home to one of the most numerous HBCUs in the nation, historically Black colleges and universities. You see them in places like Hampton University, Virginia Union University, right up the street It's quite literally a walk up the road from where I teach. Virginia State University in Petersburg, Norfolk State University, and Virginia Seminary, or Virginia University of Lynchburg. So you have these fortresses of positivity. And that's where, if or what makes them possible. And that's where I believe it's really, really important to be able to cultivate and foster strength. These institutions were founded in the crucible of things like Reconstruction and Jim Crow, when African American communities understood that controlling the classroom meant being able to control their future. So, how do we see this happening? Well, we know that the first historically Black college or university was Howard University, founded in 1865. It's no mistake that Howard was founded in 1865 because the end of the Civil War was in 1865, which meant that the 13th Amendment was ratified at the top in 1865, and that essentially meant that there was no more bondage or indentured servitude, except there's a caveat in the 13th Amendment, except if you are duly convicted of a crime, which means that you can be in prison and then that labor can be extracted, right? What then does that mean? It also means then that you have a huge population that is now available to be educated and employed. Well, when you also have this wall that gets put up against people who are available and they really want to be educated and employed, well, what do? One, you can have investment. So then you have, Quakers were really big in helping to start up schools, but you have to get these rudimentary skills: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And oftentimes, initially, there were men who were in these educational positions. But by and large, now, the way you think of it, and actually, one of my apostle mentioned this yesterday, so I'm really glad he did. The way you think of it, when you think of a teacher, a lot of times now people think of them as women. Why? Because women ended up towing that line to educate. So when you think about Black women in education, you have this hidden architecture. They weren't simply represented at HBCUs, but they were connective tissues in those HBCUs. Those institutions, they were the ones who held the institutions together. And as the students, they formed study circles, they organized civic action, they built curricula that affirmed Black identity. As alumni, just to let you know, oh, and I know those of you who are in this room, you probably know this, but singularly, a woman who has graduated from an institution is an alumna. A group of women who graduated from an institution are called alumni. A man who has graduated singularly from an institution is an alumnus, and a group of men or mixed group where there are men and women, that is alumni. Those are alumni. So alumni is a plural term. So if you want to say a woman who has graduated, she's an alumna. Women who have graduated are alumni. So as alumni, they created networks that stretched across state lines and generations. They really, truly did. These women understood that HBCUs were not just schools. They were cultivating centers. They had to be reaffirming centers, which is why a whole lot of them have chapels. They brought the church to the school. They brought the school to the church. A lot of these schools, these HBCUs, began in church basements. Well, who's taking their children to church? Lots of women were taking their children into prayer groups, taking them to do their reading, writing, arithmetic, and then they were taking them as part of a protected space for becoming, for intellectual daring, for political rehearsal, and for dreaming in full color. So as students, they organized these sit-ins, they founded newspapers. They mentored younger classmates in the art of resistance and self-possession. So when you're thinking about that, I want you to think about, she's also my soror, Katherine Johnson. This woman went forward to go to work at NASA. As educators, they designed courses that centered Black history, literature, and science, curricula as acts of intellectual sovereignty. And then as network builders through sororities, alumni associations, and professional guilds, they wove international bonds that outlasted any single generation. When you say that you are a legacy of something now, it matters truly as an African American woman. And let's not forget the Richmond 34. So during the civil rights era, sometimes Richmond gets overshadowed, quite honestly, in the era of civil rights, even though it was once the capital of the Confederacy. But sometimes Richmond gets overshadowed when you're talking about the era of civil rights because people look so much at, and they should, at Selma, at Montgomery, at Atlanta, right? They look at Greensboro. Right. And so those places are absolutely places where they should look. Even they look at Rosewood, Florida as well, right? And those towns burning, they look at, leading into the civil rights movement. We're talking about early 20s. You look at Tulsa, but there's a lot left out when it comes to Richmond. Richmond was a segregated place as well. And so when you think about this idea of forcing integration, I want you to think about a couple of things. First of all, and I talked to my students about this today, as a matter of fact, integration was not something that every person wanted. It really wasn't. If you think about the difference or the dynamic between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, Booker T. Washington was a separatist. He was a separatist. He did not necessarily think that the first step should be integration. This is at the turn of the 20th century. And this is why he and W.E.B. Du Bois bumped heads. Du Bois, the first African-American PhD from Harvard, believed in this idea of a talented 10th. He wanted to force integration through intellect, right? And so they had this differing of opinions. Nevertheless, not everybody, even though there was this big wave of the desire for integration or call for integration, especially led by the NAACP after its founding, not everybody felt comfortable with the idea of integration. Why? Because it could have challenged their safety or the safety of their children. And I'll use my mother, and she doesn't mind, I'll use my mother as an example. Richmond, even though we had Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1954, right? where we had um where we had the successful, that ruled with Thurgood Marshall saying that schools that separate but equal is no, it's not equal, right? And so that did away, it's supposed to have done away with the Jim Crow era, and it should have forced integration, or it allowed for integration for schools across the nation. You still had this thing called states' rights, and that's where this interesting balance comes between the federal government and the states, because states have a right, they have a large set of rights, where even if the Supreme Court can overturn a ruling, states can gradually accept that ruling. If you think about the Civil War, when the southern states were trying to join back, they didn't all join they didn't all join the union or rejoin the union at the same time, because it meant that every time they joined the union, every state had to ratify the 13th Amendment. So it took time, and they didn't want to be held to account for the Civil War. They had parameters, they had things that they had to meet. So, you have, from the end of Reconstruction ends in 1877 with in 1877 with the Great Compromise. And then you have Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. Plessy versus Ferguson is really the thing that gives the okay for the establishment of Jim Crow laws. So then you have this fortification of Jim Crow laws from 1896 until really the first time you see a successful rebuttal of Jim Crow laws is in 1954, when we have Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. Now, what did that mean? It meant that there should be desegregation of schools. However, because of states' rights, like, right, taking it back to that states' rights issue, because of states' rights, then states did not automatically ratify the 13th, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. They did not implement that desegregation. As a matter of fact, what you saw was a growth in private schools. Huge growth in private schools, because you had families that did not want to have their children go to school with children of different races. You also saw families taking their children out of school. Prince George's County was really big for that. Richmond did not integrate schools. until 1970, even though Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas was in 1954. So when people think about this idea of segregation in the civil rights movement, sometimes Richmond is left on the periphery of the conversation. Now, it's not necessarily as in terms of the violent instances like Selma, right? Not in Montgomery and Birmingham, right? They're not to that same degree. However, Richmond should not be left out of the conversation because it too was a segregated city. Now, this brings us to the Richmond 34. This is in the heart of what you all know as the civil rights movement. There were many civil rights movements, but this is the civil rights movement that was led by Dr. King and supported by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And so on February 22nd of 1960, then 34 Virginia Union University students, which is an HBCU. I mean, it was one of those five. Many of them Black women, as you can see in the picture below, they walked into Thalheimer's department store, which was a segregated department store in downtown Richmond. They sat at the whites only lunch counter and they refused to move. Those people were arrested, they were booked, and they were charged, and they changed the course of the course of history in our city. Had it not been for and they made national news for it, as a matter of fact. And one of the only places that you really see that conversation happening is inside of the library at Virginia Union. So it's great. They have if you ever want to go see, they have an amazing repository of this history, but the Richmond 34 are outstanding. And if you did not know the training that people had to go through, right, to go through those sit-ins to walk, one, I don't know if you dash check, but to walk in a kitten heel is not comfortable at all. To march in a skirt is not comfortable at all. You see all these people running around with yoga pants and Lululemons on and all kinds of other stuff. They got these sneakers and these Crocs and stuff. You never saw that. You never saw that. So if you really want to think about what it meant to have these women at the forefront with their hair made up, Sunday best on, always looking nice, this took a sacrifice. Moreover, Richmond also would release hoses and would release dogs. As a matter of fact, one of the pioneer women in Richmond, she was sprayed with the hose so badly that her lung collapsed and she had to be in the hospital for 2 weeks. My point is this history can never be separated from the work of women. And then we have a pioneer. She's one of my favorites. Her name is Maggie Lena Walker. Maggie Lena Walker, we love her. Sometimes people confuse her with Madam C.J. Walker. Okay. Okay, not the same. Okay, both of them amazing African Americans. Madam C.J. Walker got that hair fried, dyed, and laid to the side now. But Maggie Lena Walker helped you stack your paper. So that's how you remember the difference between the two. Madam C.J. Walker had that hair fried, dyed, laid to the side. And Maggie Lena Walker helped you learn how to stack your paper. Maggie Lena Walker she is a Richmonder through and through, and she actually lived in a district in Richmond called Historic Jackson Ward. So if you all remember, especially like after emancipation and moving through the Gilded Age into the Progressive Era, you have these towns or these cities rather where there's concentrated Black wealth. Remember, we were talking about protecting community and pouring into community. Jackson Ward was one of the wealthiest cities in Virginia, wealthiest Black cities in Virginia, much like Tulsa. So Tulsa was the first time you saw what Booker T. Washington coined a Black Wall Street. So that's why it gets the name Black Wall Street. But there were several other Black Wall Streets, and Jackson Ward was one of them. She lived in the historic Jackson Ward district, and she is the architect of economic liberation. That's what we will call her. So she in her house, just if you ever have an opportunity, if you ever come to Richmond, she's only one of three women. There are only three women who have a national historic site dedicated to them in this nation. Only three, all of whom are African American. And there are only four sites. So there's Maggie Walker, there is Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman has two, and Mary McLeod Bethune with Bethune-Cookman down in Florida. So there's only three. And Richmond has one of them because her home was preserved and it's a National Historic Site now. But Magdalena Walker was the first Black woman in the United States to charter and serve as the president of a bank. She was a part of an order called St. Luke's. And she chartered this bank called St. Luke Penny Savings Bank in Richmond. And it used to be called, so it turned into another name after she passed called Consolidated Bank and Trust. But the nickname was always called the Penny Bank. Why? Because she said, if you can save a penny, you can save a dollar and bring all those coins and you keep saving those coins up. And as you do, you can learn how to stack your paper. She was a millionaire and she loved her family very much and she took care of her family as best she could. She passed away of diabetes, but she was also one of the first women. She has this massive house. She had an add-on. She had an elevator in her home. But one thing she believed in was employing Black women, because at the turn of the century, in the 20th century, the only thing that a lot of women were, quote unquote, hired to do or considered qualified to do was housework, domestic work. And she deliberately employed them as clerks, as bank tellers, as seamstresses, as businesswomen. She had a fierce female workforce, and she meant to do that and put their faces on the front of her stores, her storefronts, her marketing material, because she meant to change the way in which African American women were seen in this city. And it worked. As a matter of fact, at the turn of the century, right around the time she started the St. Luke Penny's the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank, she also started a protest of the Richmond trolley. So Richmond was one of the first, if not the first city to have a trolley system. And I mean, I used to love the trolley. Now, I wasn't born in the early 1900s, settle down. But we had trolleys in Richmond up until I want to say the 90s. And now the trolleys are used for like tourist attractions. But you could take the trolley in the city from one place to another like you take the city bus. It was so much fun. But in the early 1900s, it was used as a primary mode of transportation in the city because it was just like a bus. And so the trolley was segregated and they would not desegregate this trolley. So what she did was, this is 50 something years before we have the Montgomery bus boycott. There was a trolley boycott in the city of Richmond that lasted almost a full year, and it almost bankrupted the trolley system. And she's the reason why the trolleys were integrated. Most people don't know that about her. Most people don't think that about her. But this woman teaching people how to control and conserve their dollars was able to change the representation in the workforce in the city and change how transportation was run in this city. So she understood that financial exclusion was a form of political captivity, for sure. She built an economic ecosystem, the bank, the newspaper called the St. Louis Herald, and a department store I was telling you about, all designed to circulate Black dollars within Black communities, particularly Jackson Ward, and reduce dependence on white controlled capital. And she just was amazing. Her quote, one of her most famous quotes, is, "I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth, but instead with a closed basket almost upon my head." Now, what she died with as is a philanthropist. And the school where I work is now her namesake. Okay? Is now her namesake. So when I tell you I could not have this conversation about the work of Black women in this Commonwealth without highlighting Magdalena Walker. I would be remiss if I didn't give this woman the flowers that she was due. Now, we can also move to the presence of African American women in civic organizations, civic clubs, and mutual aid. One thing that they were really good at is teaching about life insurance, how to purchase life insurance, how to pull from life insurance, and how to use it in order to fund things and pull equity out of it. So the institutions that Black women women built were rarely singular. They were interlocking. And you can even see that now because you can find them with, you can find women's organizations, and then the representatives in those organizations overlap with other organizations. So, for example, you can be a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, and a lot of your Alpha Kappa Alpha sisters are also members of the Links organization. And then several of those overlapping Alpha Kappa Alpha Link organizations are also Moms and Jack and Jill. And so you see these networks, and then women of distinction. So these networks are constantly growing, and they are allowing for collaboration. When we think about mutual aid societies, then we can think, long before we had government safety nets, which was something that was really, coming out of a rebound from the Depression, well, from World War II, that definitely was a Cold War creation. Black women pooled their resources to care for the sick, to bury the dead, to educate orphans, to take care of them. Groups like the Independent Order of St. Luke, which was run by Magdalena Walker, served tens of thousands of families across Virginia. And let's lift that up. Even if we want to go down to the South, let's think about a woman named Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer, if you can, let's pause Virginia and we're going to go to Fannie Lou. Fannie Lou Hamer was one of the women who said that she was the woman who said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I would also be remiss if I didn't talk about her leadership, because Fannie Lou Hamer was a sharecropper. And she and she, went to register to vote. And when she went to register to vote, because it is her right, it is when the 19th Amendment was ratified, it was ratified saying that she, as a woman, could vote. Now, when the 15th Amendment was ratified, for those of you who don't know your three basic, your three, what I call them Reconstruction amendments, your Reconstruction amendments, they are the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The 13th Amendment says, right, this is the amendment really that comes out of the writing of the Emancipation Proclamation. And that amendment, as I mentioned, said that there is to be no more enslavement or indentured servitude, except if one is duly convicted of a crime. Okay, so that's the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is something that you all may be a little bit more, and for those of you who serve in office, then you already know this, right? But this is something that under our current administration was a big deal in 2024, 2025, and that's essentially birthright citizenship. If you are born in the United States, then you have all rights. If you are born or naturalized, it's not just born. If you are born or naturalized in the United States, then you have all rights of citizenship that belongs to you as a citizen here. And then the 15th Amendment granted all men the right to vote. And that's why, and so, when people say Black men could vote before white women, that is true. It is true, for sure. Because it took another, more than 100 years before all women could vote. And so Fannie Lou, when she went to register to vote, she registered herself to vote, and then word got back to the plantation owner. And he told her, if you don't go and take your name off of the registration, you have to leave this house. I mean, have to leave this property. And she said, well, I'm exercising my right to vote. I'm not going to go back and take my name. And so he said, well, you have to leave, and you have to leave today. So she said, sure, I'll do it. And I'm glad she left when she did, because her testimony is that that night they came and shot up her home on that plantation. So had she been there, then she could have died, right? And then she was on the bus for registration, and they made us to go promote voter registration, and they made us stop, and they were supposed to make a bathroom stop. She didn't get off the bus, but when the bus was stopped by police officers, and there was questioning of the people, she got off and she said, what's going on here? And then they said, grab her. So she was arrested, and she was taken to jail where she was beaten. And it wasn't just beaten by the police officers. They made two other African American prisoners or inmates come in and beat her, and they beat her with a billy club, they punched her, all kinds of things to where she had neuropathy for the rest of her life, right? And they beat her within an inch of her life, and she survived, but they said, we're going to make you regret for you ever tried to register somebody to vote. And so so that trauma she carried with her, and she could have just been in recluse, but instead she turned that into action, and she went and continued to register people to vote. And she was such a force that she ended up speaking at the Democratic National Convention. She was on national television and she gave her testimony. And that was the first time that the whole nation was able to hear about the brutality that was predicated upon her and other people who were trying to register to vote. And not only that, she turned the tide of what was able to happen with women, because when women were not able to work, or families, she started what we call a pig bank, not a piggy bank, a pig bank, where she had a farm. And that farm, she bred piglets. And so when there was a family that was in need, she would give them a piglet to raise. And that piglet she would give to raise turned into a big pig. I'm sorry, she gave them two so that they could breed. So once they bred, then they could have their own pig farm, so they could eat the pig, and they could. But the requirement is that they brought her back a piglet, right? So there would always be something. She taught people how to save money, how to preserve. And so when we talk about mutual aid, she was a phenomenal woman when it came to, mutual aid funding. Also, we see civic and women's clubs, like we talked about, the National Association of Colored Women. So they forged the philosophy of lifting as we climb. We see the National Association for Negro Women. We see the women's branch of the Urban League. We see a lot of money teaching, financial teaching, and leadership teaching from those civic and women's clubs. Also, we see, of course, the birth of a historically Black Greek letter sororities. Of course, you see them in fraternities, right? With uh, Alpha Phi Alpha being founded in 1906. Okay. But we're talking about sororities here. So we see the birth of four amazing sororities. The first of which is Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Of course, I am a proud member. I am a proud AKA. Then we also see Delta Sigma Theta. After that, we see the birth of Zeta Phi Beta. And finally, we see the birth or the founding of Sigma Gamma Rho. And these foundings, the foundings of these Greek letter organizations, were primarily on the campus of Howard University. But a lot of the people who attended Howard University came from Virginia. Then we see church auxiliaries. The Black church was rarely just a house of worship, and we all know it. Women's missionary circles and deaconess boards served as planning centers, fundraisers, fundraising engines, and training grounds for public leadership. I mean, if you don't know a deaconess who's also, some type of political, in some type of political role, in some type of educator role, I don't know where you are, because you can find a first lady, a deaconess, the member of the mothers board, the mothers of the church board, former teachers. You find these women in and active. So when we talk about Black women in Virginia politics, then the ballot was only the beginning, right? So Black women in Virginia did not simply vote; they ran, they legislated, and they govern. And what we see is this huge wave now of women, at least women running, right? Now, I'm going to just highlight a New Yorker. She's not a Virginian, but that's okay. Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm, I think if any of you have seen the Shirley Chisholm remake or docudrama that Regina King starred in, you would know Shirley Chisholm was a bilingual New Yorker who ran for president. She was the first African American woman to run for president, and her, Black women's political work was an extension of the same institution building impulse. If the rules shape who survives, then Black women must shape the rules. If the rules shape who survives, Black women must shape, or at least must help shape the rules. So we see early mobilization after that 19th Amendment. We talked about the right to vote. We see organization en masse. As a matter of fact, we still see it. Get out the votes, registration. Let me help you vote. Let me help you know about your voter rights. That is a big thing across communities. We see the breaking of barriers with Ora Stokes, who led educational and civic campaigns that laid the groundwork for, electoral breakthroughs. We see legislation change. We see Black women being elected to office. Why? Because after the 19th Amendment, more Black women could vote for these women, right? So the 19th Amendment opened up the opportunity not only for voting, but for women's representation in politics. And because they can have representation in politics, then they could choose, they could help decide how money, how energy, how power, and how legislature was focused. Now we see today's legacy, right? So we see, we see one of our current senators. We see Virginia's growth, cradle of Black women in state and local government. It continues this tradition. As a matter of fact, and I am remiss because I should have put her face up here. I'm going to talk about, she's from South Carolina, but she lives in Virginia. And she is my main mentor. I love her, love her. She's a South Carolinian, but she lives in Virginia. So in my mind, she counts. Her name is Dr. Alacia Black Hackett. Dr. Alacia Black Hackett was a Biden Harris appointee. She was the first, not one of the first. She was the first chief diversity officer for the United States Department of Labor. The first one. There was never one before her. It's not even the first woman, the first Black woman, the first Black man, the first man. She was the first person, and that first person was a Black woman. She also was the deputy chief diversity officer under the Northam administration for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So when I tell you that Black women are everywhere, they are everywhere. Not to mention our former Vice President Kamala Harris. Black women have had a long revolution in education. The longest revolution, honestly. We see going from these clandestine schools, before emancipation, you had Black women who, risked imprisonment to teach enslaved people to read because literacy was liberation. Then in the Reconstruction era, you have them as being the primary teachers in these classrooms and these makeshift dirt floor, church benches, classrooms. And then you see them leading massive resistance. And they have become now today's educators. I'm telling you what I know because at the school where I teach, there are 3 African American teachers, not the only ones in the school, 3 African American teachers. All of us are Black women. All of us are women. You see, I'm telling you what I know. And we teach at an elite school. So these women taught children how to see themselves as full human beings. And if you notice the picture that I have here, those are some of Virginia's hidden figures. These are the women that the movie Hidden Figures was written about, to include most of these women are, of course, sorors of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I will say that again. But then there's one who I did not put here, and I'd be remiss if I did not mention her. Her name is Dr. Gladys West, also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She's my darling line sister's mother. She recently passed away. Dr. Gladys West, if you ever want to turn on your GPS and turn on the navigation system, you can say, "Thank you, Madam West, for doing such a thing." She is the one who did the math that then became our GPS. So when we think about education, innovation, longest revolution, institutions, you see Black women everywhere. We are the institution. Every school you founded, every dollar you saved, every child you shielded, every ballot you cast, every meeting you called to order, that was institution building. That is power. And it still is present. So here's a call to action. I challenge, right? I challenge you, and I should be going back to my regular screen. I don't know. Yeah. So the call to action is a challenge. I challenge you to find out about women in education and innovation, in politics who are African American. There are so many of them. I was contacted by one, who I thought I didn't know if tonight was going to be a teaching or a panel. And so it ended up being a teaching. I was prepared either way, but it just, I challenge you to find out something new about the work of African American women in your state, the work in your region, or the work in your city. There are living history makers, living trailblazers, living history makers in your city, and that work doesn't end. And not only do I challenge you to find out about them, I implore you to collaborate with them. If you see an area of opportunity, I implore you to partner with them to indeed be the change that you wish to see happening with them. And even though we make it look pretty, because we are, and even though we make it look good, because we are, that doesn't mean that everything is easy, right? And so as you learn more about them, I've given you several women to consider. Then consider how you can be a servant leader that, or who can work alongside them across party lines. How can you help to make their teaching experience better? Because they really work to make your children's experience better, their constituents' experiences better. And in the meantime, it's a heavy lift that Black women have that is considered a thankless job. It is a heavy lift, and we are very strong because we have to be. And I'm going to give you a little nugget and aside. Black women, we are strong because we have to be, not always because we want to be. And a lot of that is deeply rooted in the period of enslavement when husbands and fathers were snatched away from their children and their wives, and those women had to remain on plantation with their children, hopefully, and raised them as single mothers. This concept of the Black single mother was rooted in the 17th century. And then it became vilified after Reconstruction and almost criminalized and financially choked a lot of women who live in urban areas who have to rely on a single parent income, when in fact this was systemic. So when you see, that's whether they're married, whether they're not, whether it's multi-income, whether they do well, whether they don't, whatever the case may be, you just have to know that they are a part of a history that has carried many nations for many generations. So see what you can do in order to help collaborate, in order to continue to elect, support, lobby for the advancement of women of color in your city, in your community, in your state, and across this nation, because it is by them and through them that help, the reason, one of the reasons why the nation was able to be, I don't want to say so successful, but it is through the resilience of Black women that we have entire successful generations. So I do want to leave you with that. One last thing is, if you are interested, I've been offering this all month. If you are interested, I created something called African History by Mail, the diaspora in context. And what that is if you have ever wanted to know more about the continent of Africa, the African diaspora, and really wanted to have something where you could say, oh, I can touch this, I can read about this, an example, an actual copy of a primary source, and more than just giving you some small information. If you're interested, then this is something that gets delivered to you every month. I'll let you scan it, take a look at it. If you're interested, wonderful, we'll send it to you. If not, that's okay as well. I will be on here educating all the live long days. So, it's a benefit if you are interested in having it. But for now, I will say thank you so much. I hope that this has been fruitful, beneficial, insightful, and it gives you, a new energy. Do you all have, or any of you have any questions? Make sure. Oh, Isabel, it's been a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so, so much. Guys, it's been amazing. I actually am not only am I a teacher, I'm back in as a student, we're always learning. That's to have a growth mindset. Oh, you all have been amazing. So I gotta go do my homework, okay, before I go to bed. So I hope you have a phenomenal night. I hope you have an amazing rest of your week and a beautiful weekend ahead. I hope to see you guys on next Wednesday at 7:30. Um, you hope it's available. Oh, I'm gonna put it up on YouTube. So I'll when I do that, then I'll post the YouTube link. But it was so good to bring you on anyway, Shabazz. Thank you so much. So next week we have our final installment, and I will see you then. We are going to talk about culture and power. So take care, guys. Thank you so much. God bless you and have a great evening. Wish you the best as well.